Hello, this is Joe Polish.
And this is Dan Sullivan, and we are together on 10
10X
times
Talk.
5.
Awesome. So, all right, Dan, great to be here. And here's what I'm thinking we should talk about for this episode. So, me, you, and Babs had a conversation a couple days ago, and I shared my radical idea that is radical to me, although I think it's one of the most logical things that's come to me lately. And in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of COVID and everything going on, it's been a pretty stressful time. Last year, from the death of one of my best friends to the ending of a relationship to a massive, betrayal from a long-term relationship I had to having valley fever, which people that don't live in Arizona, they may not know what that is. But I had just a bunch of challenges. And it occurred to me that I've had stages in my business over the years, which you've been witness to this because I've been in strategic coach since 1997. There's been periods of time where my business has been absolutely easy, lucrative, and fun, and times where it's been half hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating, sometimes hard, annoying, lucrative, and frustrating, and everything in between. And so last year was one of the most difficult years that I've had in like 10 years in terms of complexity. And then it bled right into the pandemic. And I think we've done a pretty good job, to use the word everyone throws around, pivoting and changing and doing virtual events. And for the most part, I think we've done a really darn good job with our team. We've had some team members that just aren't with us anymore, new ones that we've added, clients that are really engaged, some that are not, but a lot of people are dealing with psychological dangers. And you do a great job of explaining physical dangers and psychological dangers. And so I had a conversation with you and Babs because I wanted to get your advice and feedback on how could I actually take a sabbatical.
Mm-hmm.
And this thought came to me over the last couple of weeks. And then I talked to my buddy David Bach, who's also been in strategic coach on and off over the years. And David is a New York Times bestselling author. Many people know him. He wrote books like, The Automatic Millionaire, Smart Women Finish Rich. His latest book is called The Latte Factor. And in 2013, when he had joined the 10 Times program, you presented to everyone, how would you 10 times your business or your life, which is the premise of this podcast, different ideas about it. Most people think of it in terms of money, either gross revenue, net revenue, clients, but he really took it and did it about how could he 10 times his free time. And that's where he came up with this thought to do a sabbatical. And so in Genius Network, he had given a 10-minute talk on doing a sabbatical in 2015. And I had also introduced him to a guy named Bob Roth, who is, really well known for teaching people transcendental meditation. And during that year, David told me that was one of the most valuable things he'd ever done is getting trained in TM, which, you've been meditating with Babs for, I think, how many years now?
It'll be it's about half a century, about 50 years. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So those are kind of like mini sabbaticals for people daily, right? and so I've been doing this whole setup, and I am a really driven guy, and I work with a lot of people that struggle with addiction, and I see that we're in the middle of one of the greatest mental health crises in human history, with addiction and vices, and escapism, and just mental anguish and depression. And I talk to people on a regular basis that are suicidal because of the work I do with Genius Recovery. And it just occurred to me like, man, doing a sabbatical. And since you've been teaching, you're one of the few people that I know that talks about double your business, triple your business, 10 times your business, while also taking free time. Like most speakers, they say it sort of for window dressings. It sounds good because you think that, people that are really successful have a lot of time freedom, and many people do not. They may have different types of freedom. And it really occurred to me that, right now, even though I teach ELF in terms of marketing and stuff, it's not been very ELF lately. And the reason is I got too much going on. And me and you even did a podcast on this, to use your line, entrepreneurs that are too tightly scheduled cannot transform themselves. Mm-hmm. And I really want to, kind of talk about that and tie it into sabbaticals. And I've thought that, I need to rejuvenate. I need to go step back and really not be so tightly scheduled and cut off a lot of, things that are really good, because success traps are harder to get out of than failure traps, right? And I have a lot of successful things in my life, and I get so many good opportunities presented to me, as do you, as does anyone that has worked, for a long time laying down tracks. And we get opportunity intoxication, where opportunities that I used to, oh my God, I can't wait. If I could only have an opportunity like that, my life would forever change. And I find myself now getting presented with these opportunities, and instead of getting excited, I sigh like, oh, another great opportunity coming my way. And so I've said, if I am going to really do a sabbatical, what would it need to look like? Why would I do it? How does one set it up? And there's no better person to talk to about this than you, because you've been teaching free days, living free days. You have the time system for entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of people out there that I don't think they could even wrap their head around it, that they could take a sabbatical. And 3 weeks ago, that would have been me. Like, how could I ever stop? I have equity in multiple companies. I have a foundation. I have several businesses. I've, lots of Genius Network members. I got literally, hundreds of thousands of people that listen to my podcast. There's all this stuff. And so that's sort of the setup. I wanted to say that in the beginning, and then kind of go into a conversation about it, going back to the line, entrepreneurs that are too tightly scheduled cannot transform themselves. And I wanted to ask you to describe what you think about that. And for the purposes of our listeners, I'm not saying that this is not telling you how you should live your life or run your business or whatever. I'm really just talking about the subject of it and how to enter 2.0, whatever phase that is for me. Joe Polish 2.0, Dan Sullivan 2.0, our listener 2.0. For me, I'm thinking in order to get there, a sabbatical seems to be one of the smartest things I could do right now. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, my answer to it, I think, would have been different before the pandemic. Because first of all, I've got the experience of I won't say a lot, but certainly dozens out of 20,000 that we've had in the program, 20,000 entrepreneurs. But I know dozens who've done sabbaticals, 3 months, 6 months, a year. And, and in some cases, they let me in on it before they did it. So they could ask me some thoughts about it. But I think that the current situation in the world is different from what anyone has experienced before this. And I'm 76 years old, and a lot of things have happened in 76 years. And I think this is a very different one from what I've experienced before. And two things I'd like to say about this. You were talking about psychological, people being really, really impacted negatively, psychologically and emotionally. And I knew a client who was in the Northridge, California earthquake at a suburb of Los Angeles. And he was about 2 miles from the epicenter, and got a really bad shaking. I mean, everything, and it was quite long by his recollection, and the video sort of supported that he went through about 15 seconds of shaking. And he said, there's one thing that gives us a sense of security as human beings. The earth doesn't move. I mean, you're born here, and the earth is solid ground. But he said he says when it does move, and you feel absolutely no control, it unsettles every other belief you have about what's secure and what's not secure. So I think that the pandemic's a bit like a earthquake of that sort. It has, but here it affects everybody, because everybody gets intersected by other people's reactions to it. You may be pretty solid yourself, but you're being impacted by other people's turbulence, and it's global. It's global. It's probably the first really truly global experience where no matter where you went in the world, meeting a stranger, you could have a conversation with that person, and pretty soon you could talk about the pandemic and how it affected them, and that it would have affected them in some way. The other one is it was just a little article I read. People have it mixed up, and there's a lot of talk about computers being able to think, and as they get faster, pretty soon computers will be able to outthink human beings, and just because they can process information much more quickly than human beings can. And the author, and it struck me as a different opinion. He said, well, we don't process information. We take raw impacts in, like sensations. We take sensations, and then we transform them into our own sense of meaning. So he said, we in fact don't process information like computers do, is that we get senses from all over. And there's a belief now that we have more senses than just the five, that the entire human body is a sensing organization, and could be that our sense of sight and maybe even picking up on radio signals from other people, but we're constantly processing this, and we're turning it into meaning for ourselves. So I think everybody has an absolute need on a constant basis to make meaning out of their experience. And I think that's what we are. We're kind of meaning-making creatures,
Yep.
And you're very, very quick at taking negatives and turning them into positives. And, I admire your skill in doing this, especially when it's in public. You're able to shift very, very quickly. But there's probably a price to pay for it in private, and I think you've taken some huge blows, just from what you've communicated to me as we've gone. We see each other quite a lot, and we talk to each other a lot. And I think one is that probably your system of transforming negative into positive would just like to take a break.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. And
it's tired. It's like a muscle, but you've been using the muscle extensively in overdrive almost over the last year. And that seems completely natural to me. Everything else gets tired. And when we're forced to continually deal with certain kinds of experience in a skillful way, but the skill gets tired out.
Right. And the other thing too, Dan, based on what you said, even when I've taken some free days, I find myself not rejuvenating or not being able to disconnect because be it my nervous system, my sympathetic, parasympathetic system, the heightened state, the fact that I'm an empath, so I tend to take on the energy and the pain of others, and so it's pretty difficult at times. And so I want to take a break. And so so if I can ask you a question about that, so like, because I'd written down a couple of questions that I wanted to just have a discussion with you about. One of them is, what's the importance of free days and taking a sabbatical for entrepreneurial rejuvenation and energy? Just even go to the most basic stuff, because a lot of people, I've heard you say, the model that most people look at is, I'm going to take free days because I've worked really hard and I've earned them, not you take free days because it actually makes you better and you perform better.
Yeah. So I think one of the switches that we made in Coach very early, and I have to give all the credit here to Babs Smith, who's my wife and my partner in Coach. I was as much a workaholic as any entrepreneur who has that as an addiction, that we've ever seen in the program. You and I sitting in workshops, and we've talked to people who are really addicted to work. And before I met Babs, which was in the early '80s, I've probably gone 20 years without what I would actually call a free day. In other words, that the work that I had to do at that time, I was doing that work on all my days, And I grew up in a family, we never took vacations. We a farm family, never took vacations. I remember we went to Florida once for a week, and all of us vowed we would never go again. It was such a terrible experience. And so I grew up in a work culture, and I had all my role models were workers, and I did it. But what I noticed, my big concern was why, and it was just an observation, why when people get to that stage in their career, and I've grown up with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I said, why right about, you, let's say 50s and 60s, which is really called the power of success decade. For most entrepreneurs, your 50s and 60s. First of all, you got a ton of experience, and you've you've uh, uh, you've practiced until you've practiced until you can't get it wrong. Amateurs practice until they can get it right. Professionals practice until they can't get it wrong, and that just makes a lot of mistakes and a lot of experimentation, a lot of R&D. And why is it that I notice that they run out of ambition when they're around 50? They run out of ambition, they run out of energy. And I said, what's happening there? And then, I started tracing the alligators back to where they came from. And it's that it's just been work, 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 work. They put in already a lifetime of work by the time they hit 50, and they're just tired.
Right.
And there's a lot of tragedy to that, because people are quitting their game right at the top of their skills, right at the top of their reputation, right at the top. So, I didn't want that to happen to me. And then I met Babs, and Babs said, we can't have a relationship if you're not going to take free days. And I thought that was kind of vague. That was kind of vague. And she said, no, she says, you have to take free days. And yeah, it was tough, the first free days, but I got it because she's so good at taking the free days that I launched into it. And I was a changed man. And then I took, I took her idea and packaged it.
No, yeah, you certainly did. And I think you've probably been single-handedly more responsible for giving not only a lifetime extension, because you even have, a whole process in strategic coach. You've written a whole book about it, called The Lifetime Extender and Living to be 156. And, I mean, I cannot tell you how many countless thousands of entrepreneurs all over the world, even many that listen to our podcast and stuff, never would have had that life had it not been for you packaging that concept and turning it into a life design. And I mean, even, I was talking to you a couple of days ago, I've my friend BJ Fogg, who's going to become a Genius Network member. He's the professor at Stanford who.
We'll see him next week. We'll see him next week.
Yeah, he's speaking at our 100K group. And BJ's going to do a behavior design class for all of our Genius Network members. And he has a book called Tiny Habits, where if you're going to, in any sort of behavior, good or bad, it starts with tiny habits, right? And you said it was really hard in the beginning, and I equate this, workaholism is an addiction. An addiction, to describe it, there's many different ways people can define addiction. One of the ways I define it is doing something you want to do or that you don't want to do, and not being able to stop, that has negative consequences attached to it. And there's obsessiveness and compulsiveness. And addicts don't pursue harmony, they pursue chaos. And for some reason, chaos is appetizing. It's like this old Guns N' Roses album. It was titled Appetite for Destruction. And you can have an appetite for things that are very destructive. And there's a book on workaholism with a subtitle that's, Workaholism, the Respectable Addiction. And, it's real easy to hide under words like, I'm obsessed with success, or I'm obsessed with exercise, or I'm obsessed with building a business. What they're really saying is, I'm an addict and I can't stop. And there are withdrawals. It's really hard. And, one of the reasons I was talking to you and talking to David and going through this whole process, and even publicly talking about it right now, is, I know for a fact that anytime you change a certain behavior, there's an identity attached to it. There's easy ways to rationalize almost anything, even stuff that's negative. I mean, I can even see when I'm like, oh yeah, let me excuse this sort of thing that I may think is good, but is really tearing me down. So can I ask you, how did you start? Because a lot of people will hear this and say, yeah, I'd love to take a sabbatical, but I don't know how I can handle cash flow. What about all my employees? Or I'd love to take free time, but I got a business to manage, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and God knows if it's going to get worse, or we have no idea what stage someone's, some people are doing well, other people, their businesses are completely wiped out, and everything in between. How did you approach it, and how did you do it in so the people listening to this could actually, not just be excited with the concept, but could actually make it part of their life?
Well, I think, one thing, and you and I have all, and a lot of the entrepreneurs, we've read books on habits, and I'm really looking forward to Professor Fogg, coming and talking about it. But one thing that I tried to do when I tried to change a habit that, for good, or stop doing something. And the other thing is, I don't try to change bad habits. I try to develop so many good habits that the bad habits are just crowded out. I think that if you have a negative habit, it actually enjoys you trying to change it.
Mm.
Yeah. Change me, beat me, like that. It's so just a couple of things that I've found as ways of thinking that this really works is don't try to stop negative habits, but keep focusing on using up your time with good habits. So you only have a certain amount of time. And then, speaking of time, we have a natural habit, that everybody has this habit that we live our life in days. And so what I simply said was that I'll consider the days 24-hour from midnight to midnight. And if I take a free day, it's within that framework of midnight to midnight. Most of, I sleep a lot, so probably a third of that day I'm going to be asleep of the 24 hours. So it's 16 hours. And then the other thing I said, since I'm doing something that's kind of new, I should take advantage of another habit, which is scheduling. And so I would schedule my free time the same way that I would schedule my work time. In other words, what are you doing from this time to this time, this time, this time, this time? Go for a hike, exercise, go for a swim, read a novel, and everything else. Because it's really hard to go from a habit, which is really incredibly structured, to a period of time when nothing's structured. You want to go back to the structure as fast as you can. Okay. Yeah. And so my sense is, I always tell people, when you do this, probably you'll want to schedule it. Treat it as a day. Doesn't matter what you do tomorrow. Today's going to be a free day. You can do anything you want tomorrow. And the other thing is, don't push yourself too far into the future. You say, well, I'm going to do this, for the next 5 years. Well, that's a lot of days. Why don't we just take them one at a time? And the other thing is that you're either winning or you're learning. So the way that I look at it is that you're either being free in the way you wanted to be free, or it got interfered with work, and just stop and treat that as a lesson. Why? And so it's not a failure. It's just that you switch from winning to learning. There is no failure. There's winning and there's learning. So you've never done a sabbatical before. So guess what? You're going to learn a lot about what prevents sabbaticals, and I would treat them as lessons. I just noticed that this comes up. Well, that's really, really interesting. You get more and more knowledgeable. And, I'm talking about free days here, but the big project is your sabbatical project.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that I tipped off. And then you just notice that you probably don't have free time because there is no meaning in free time. All the meaning's in work time.
Yeah, exactly. No, that is a huge thing to ponder. Yeah, we're going to do an upcoming episode on thinking about your thinking, and I think I'm going to come back to that because that's
Yeah.
one of my favorite Dan Sullivan lines. It's hard to say what is my, people are like, what's your favorite book? It's like, well, there's a lot, but what's your favorite Dan Sullivan line? Well, there's a lot of them. One that I put up there is the problem is not the problem. The problem is how you think about the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, let me ask you this then. Well, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and we'll wrap up this episode. But where do entrepreneurs go wrong when it comes to energy? Taking time off in their business, because for me, it's more about energy management than time management or even priority management. Because I realize if my energy's low, I don't think well, I can't focus as effectively. I make decisions that I certainly would not make. I get moody, stressed out, and I'm more apt to react to life, not respond to life. And I know that when being in recovery for many years from addiction, when my life is not working, I'm reacting. When my life is working, I'm responding. And I think of responding as just responsibility, responding with ability. And if I'm tired, if I'm exhausted, if it's the whole thing the model you have where task, problem, crisis. Task is eating lunch. Task is returning a phone call, maybe checking emails. But if you're tired and exhausted, every task in life is viewed through the lens of it's a problem or it's a crisis. And so that comes to energy. So again, my question is, where do entrepreneurs go wrong when it comes to energy, taking time off in their business?
Yeah, and our friend Ben Hardy has a lot to talk along these lines. And making as I talked to Ben about his two first books, that willpower doesn't work and personality isn't permanent. I've just come up with a mental model where you have it's kind of like your present self is responding to two other selves. You're responding to your past self, or you're responding to your future self. And it's an uneven fight because it doesn't take any talent to have a past self. It takes a lot of talent to have a future self.
Yeah.
I mean, all it requires is that your heart keep beating and your lungs keep working to have a past self. And my sense is a lot of entrepreneurs are running away from a self that they don't like. In other words, it's probably a self that was a failure, a self that lived in bad conditions, a self that felt powerless, a self, and they set goals to run away from their past self, and it's it's a lifetime race, and at the end the past self wins. The future self has to be created, and it's not created as a reaction. It's created that this is really what you would want. Okay. Now, I would say, Joe, that both of those responses, whether you're running away from your past self or you're creating a new self, generates chemical, it generates exciting drugs,
Right.
one way or the other. It comes down to which kind of drug is better for you.
Yeah. Which one expands you? Which one contracts you? Well, so let me ask you this. This will be the last thing, and then because I wanted to plant the seed on this episode about just getting people thinking about it, because I know that this is a really radical idea for someone that is not, even free days is a radical idea for.
Well, it's beyond radical, Joe. You've made the decision that you're going to do it.
Oh yeah, no. For
it's not a radical idea anymore. It's people. I'm just going to relate it because it does have relationship to your decision. So one person at workshop came, "Can I talk to you privately?" And I said yes. And he said, "I'm thinking about divorcing my wife." And I said, "Oh no, you're not thinking about divorcing your wife. You've decided to divorce your wife." And he said, no, you made the decision. You know how long it takes to get the thought all the way up to your head and then say it to someone else? "I'm thinking about divorcing my wife." I said, no, that decision was made long ago. you don't have a problem with the decision, you have a problem with the implementation.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about the implementation? I think it's the same thing with the sabbatical. You've decided.
Yeah.
So I mean, you wouldn't have even said it to me, and we're pretty close. You wouldn't have even said it to me if you hadn't decided.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I definitely been pondering this for a period of time. And the first conversation I had was with Eunice, my assistant of 25 years, and just saying, okay, how do we need to set up the company so it not only continues, but it's actually better? And, how do we do it in a way that's not absolutely shocking to the members? They're like, oh my God, how's Genius Network going to continue? And how's all this stuff going to do? And what are we going to basically say no to? And what are we going to, it's setting up the game. And I've always loved the line I got from, Gary Halbert years ago, which is some games in life, the only way you win is you don't play. And I've gotten myself into some games that on the surface look like they're winning games, but in terms of psychological satiation, in terms of where they're really taking me and how they make me feel, no matter how well I play them, the best way to win them is to not play them anymore. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of it is we make it up and make it real, to use your line, right? We make it up and make it real. So I definitely I've already made the decision. Now I'm just dealing with implementation.
Yeah.
And what I meant about radical thing is for people that are listening to this, because I always try to take my experience and my thoughts and apply it to all our listeners is, how can an entrepreneur start thinking about taking a sabbatical or even free days if they wanted to, but they've not done it before, that we haven't obviously already discussed?
Yeah, well, I think that I think you mentioned in describing how you talked about it to Eunice was that I want to transform my entire company, and the very first step of transforming my company is for me to take a 1-year sabbatical. Mm-hmm. Yep. And have everybody else's talents come to the forefront and jump to another level while I'm on my sabbatical.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's great is, talking with you, like that day that we talked, I had 5 hours of conversation that day with trusted people, and it was the kicking off point. And like some of my very best members, people that pay to be in Genius Network. And I talked to 4 different people that, that are either in Genius Network or in my 100K group. And every one of them are like, I'm still in the group. I will still pay and I will facilitate. I will help any way you want. I mean, like the support I got. And what's even more funny is there was, I was looking at a piece of property, like a building that would be a place to hold workshops, because I've already started some crazy projects that either I keep them going or I just put them on hold, or I just end them. And this one person who I said, you know what, I don't think I'm going to look at this property anymore. He's actually a very successful real estate person, and I said, because I'm going to take a sabbatical, and this doesn't fit. And this person is like extraordinarily successful, multimillionaire, and very driven. And he sent back this message, an audio message on my phone, and he's like, can you please tell me how you're doing it? I'm so curious and so interested in how it just showed me how many people are dying for this, but they don't have like a Babs or someone that's given them permission to do this. And it really occurred to me that they don't even know how to think about this, which is why I wanted to do an episode on it. I wanted to just plant a seed and let people really think about it and really ponder it. And then as I develop this and as we talk about things, because 10X Talk, to go back to David Bach, when he heard you talk about 10 times, I mean, that was the trigger that, he had mentioned, he goes, I think he was 46 at the time or 45 or something. And he said, I felt like I was 50. He's like, I just felt old. And I felt tired, and it made him realize that he needed to do this, not because, he's going to earn it, but he deserves it. But it's like, man, his future, what's it going to look like? And I realized if I don't do this now, when am I ever going to do it? I mean, how
Mhm.
many other excuses can I possibly make for not doing this? And that's where I'm at. And so,
Yep.
so what we're going to talk about on the next episodes, Dan, we're going to talk about scary times. Is there anything else you think that we should, that you wanted to share or say to this topic, to put a cherry on top before we wrap up, and then we'll go on to the next?
No, the only thing I would say is two things. Um, I was born into a world, you were probably born into a world where physical work was still the main activity for most people, physical, and you got tired physically, you just got tired. And it was probably repetitive work, so it got boring. So tired and boring is a good reason to stop doing something after 50 years or so. Yours is intensely mental, it's intensely creative. And the other thing is that we we are now living in an age where being active at 80 or 90 is not an unusual idea. As a matter of fact, there's an enormous amount of emphasis being 80 and 90. And so, you know, 100 years ago, you were lucky to be your age and still alive. Now you're, you know, the onus is on you being as young as you can be for as long as you can be. So,
Right.
and I think that the whole notion of sabbatical and free time and, having lots of different gears in your daily life that give you different kind of positive rejuvenation. I think it's the topic of the times right now. So, and the thing is that I think that you'll hit a nerve here just by us putting this podcast out there, because a lot of people have been secretly guilty about this thought that they'd like to take 3 months off or 6 months off or a year off, and you're just like giving them permission to talk openly about it.
Yeah, awesome. So with that said, then what I'd like to invite everyone listening to this is we're going to have comments at 10xtalk.com where this podcast is. And wherever you hear it, if you happen to see this online or it's shared with you by somebody or on social media, and of course, we hope that you are subscribing to the podcast that me and Dan do. You can subscribe anywhere you can find podcasts. 10xtalk.com is our main site for this. Love to hear any thoughts, feedback, suggestions, questions that people would have related to this topic. And based on what comes in, me and Dan will continue to have a conversation about it. I can, and based on the feedback that we get, we'll do a future episode. We'll put out any sort of materials that would be helpful. Dan's written books on the topic of free days. Of course, Strategic Coach is an entire program where they teach the personal economic system for entrepreneurs. And so this will be a continuing conversation. So if you know anyone that's overworked or stressed out that is an entrepreneur that would be well served to listen to this, then go ahead and share this episode with them, and go to our website at 10xtalk.com and give us your comments, because this is a seed that I wanted to plant, and it will grow into something, and we want the fruit to be something that helps you lead a 10x business and a 10x life. So thank you, Dan. And
Thank you, Joe.
we'll talk to you guys on the next episode.